April 1967 was supposed to mark the beginning of spring across Western Canada. Instead, a single fortnight unleashed 175 centimeters of relentless snow, burying towns, vanishing highways, isolating Manitoba, and swallowing Alberta beneath drifts 5 meters high. What turned an ordinary prairie spring into the disaster Canadians still measure all others against? The answer lies buried in the storms that followed, and the devastation that unfolded. On April 17, 1967, in southern Alberta, the day began with the usual routines of spring. By noon, snow was falling so hard that fences and roads blurred into the wind. Over the next 4 days, the storm refused to let up. Each sunrise revealed deeper drifts, and each night buried what little had been cleared. By April 20th, fields and highways were lost beneath a heavy white sheet. There was no real break. The cold held, and the snow never truly melted. For a week, the landscape sat frozen, waiting. Then on April 27th, 1967, the second blizzard struck. This storm arrived with even greater force, hammering the prairies for 3 more days. By April 29th, the numbers told their own story. Nearly 175 centimeters of snow had fallen in less than 2 weeks, almost 6 feet, stacked storm upon storm. The weight of it silenced entire towns. For a moment, nothing moved. The calendar said spring, but the world outside belonged to winter. Snow swallowed the prairie in every direction. In southern Alberta, drifts piled up until fence posts vanished and barns seemed to sink into the ground. Reports measured snowbanks 5 meters high, taller than a 1-story house, stretching along roadsides and curling against the walls of grain elevators. Highways that once tied towns together disappeared without a trace. Road crews marked intersections with poles, but even those were soon buried or toppled by the wind. In Saskatchewan, the familiar grid of rural roads faded beneath waves of white, leaving only the faintest memory of where the gravel had run. Cars and trucks sat abandoned, half consumed by snow, their roofs barely visible above the drifts. In Manitoba, the storm pressed on until entire communities became islands, cut off from the world. Mail stopped. Groceries ran out. Farmers looked out their windows and saw nothing but an unbroken field of snow, horizon to horizon. The prairie, usually open and endless, now felt closed and claustrophobic. Every path was blocked. Even the railway lines, built to conquer distance, vanished beneath the snowpack, leaving only the whistle of a distant train to remind people that somewhere beyond the white, the world still moved. The landscape itself had become an obstacle, and for the first time in memory, movement was not just difficult, it was impossible. Ranchers across southern Alberta woke each morning to a silence that cut deeper than the cold. Cattle, already turned out to pasture for spring, vanished into drifts that swallowed fences and gates. Days passed with no way through. Snow packed so high that feed bunks disappeared, and the path from house to barn became a tunnel of white. Families watched helplessly as herds grew restless, then still. Calves born into the storm froze where they stood, 30,000 lost on the open range in less than 2 weeks. Even seasoned ranchers, hardened by decades of prairie weather, found themselves counting the bodies by the dozen. The phone lines were quiet. Roads were gone. Some tried to break through on foot, carrying hay bales by hand, but the wind and snow erased their tracks before they could return. One rancher recalled the morning he found a string of calves lined against the fence, frozen in place. Insurance would never cover the loss. For many, the blizzard was not just a bad year, it was a ruinous blow, with losses running into the millions, and no rescue in sight. In villages scattered across the prairies, life shrank to the space between 4 walls. Snow pressed against doors and windows, sealing homes in silence. The roads that once brought bread, mail, and fuel were gone, buried beneath drifts that no horse or truck could cross. Grocery shelves sat empty. Oil tanks dipped lower each day. With every passing hour, families counted cans and candles, measuring out what little they had. Rationing became routine. A loaf of bread for 3 days, a splash of kerosene saved for the coldest night. In the absence of outside help, survival turned inward. Neighbors bundled up and trudged through waist-high snow, moving from house to house, checking on the elderly and those living alone. A knock at the door was more than a courtesy. It was a lifeline. Stories from local newspapers tell of families stringing ropes between houses, guiding each other through whiteouts. In some towns, a single working radio became the thread tying everyone together, broadcasting messages of hope and requests for medicine or milk. The supply chains had stopped, but the chain of care, neighbor to neighbor, held fast against the storm. Army trucks rolled out from bases in Alberta, their tires buried to the axles in snow almost as deep as the trucks themselves. Uniformed crews with shovels and radios worked alongside local volunteers, carving narrow corridors through drifts that swallowed entire roads. In the air, the steady chop of helicopters cut through the silence. Canadian and American military pilots flew low over white fields, scanning for any sign of life. Each run meant dropping bales of hay to stranded cattle, or lowering crates of groceries and medicine to farmyards, where the only visible landmark was a patch of roof. Some flights delivered fuel for oil tanks running dry, and others carried medical supplies for isolated clinics. Inside rural hospitals, nurses worked around the clock. Admissions for frostbite and exposure climbed as families finally reached safety. Makeshift wards filled with children whose fingers had turned waxy from the cold, and with men who had tried to walk for help but collapsed in the snow. Ambulances, when they could move at all, followed behind plows or waited for military escorts. For the first time, the region depended on outside rescue not just for comfort, but for survival. Even with soldiers and helicopters, not every call for help came in time. The storm had pushed the prairies to the edge, and the line between rescue and loss grew thin with each passing day. In the aftermath, Ottawa issued a bulletin that broke from routine. The revenue minister announced a 2-week extension for filing income taxes, pushing the deadline to May 15th for southern Albertans. Newspaper headlines called it Blizzard Mercy. The message was clear: normal expectations had collapsed under the weight of the storm. For many, this was the first time the federal government so openly acknowledged that nature, not policy, set the rules. Relief programs followed, but the tax extension became the symbol. It was a rare admission that daily life could not simply resume, that the machinery of government itself had been slowed by snow. In the years since, the blizzards of 1967 have become the yardstick against which every prairie storm is measured. Anniversaries bring out old photographs, yellowed clippings, and stories passed down through families. The phrase "not since '67" carries a weight that needs no explanation. For a generation, the memory of those 2 weeks, when the calendar promised spring but the blizzards refused to leave, remains the benchmark for hardship and resilience across the prairies. Today, climate extremes are no longer rare. Emergency planners still cite 1967 when preparing for the unexpected, because one brutal spring proved even modern communities can be buried overnight. The next crisis may not wait for us to be ready. Nature never asks permission before rewriting the rules.